Well, welcome this morning. How's everybody doing this morning? Yeah? Did you have a good time at the party last night? Yeah. Was it good? I was working on slides, so I couldn't go. This morning we'll be talking about SQL Data Services. My name is Patrick McElroy. I'm the Group Program Manager for the SQL Services team at Microsoft. Just to give you a little bit of background on me, and as well as a little bit about what we'll talk about. I'm actually a relative newbie in the services world. I've been with the team a little bit over five months, I think. My background before that is actually in enterprise server software, which I've built and shipped enterprise server software products both at Microsoft and before for about 15 years before joining the SQL Services team. And in that time, it's been an incredible education in terms of how some of the commonalities between building enterprise-ready server software that needs to scale, that needs to be able to handle massive amounts of data and transactions, and what it takes to build that so customers can take that and use it and program against it. But then also some of the unique engineering challenges, but also in talking to a lot of you, some of the new possibilities that delivering some of those capabilities as services brings to us. And so it's been great, and I know that a lot of you, particularly this week, are probably trying to get your heads wrapped around, the software plus services, how you might take advantage of it, how you might be able to leverage some of those new capabilities in the types of applications that you need to build for your businesses and for your customers. So what we'll do today is, hopefully a lot of you, if not every single one of you, went and saw both Dave Campbell, his talk on Monday, where he gave a broad overview of the SQL data platform all up, spanning from both the on-premises to some of the new cloud investments. Sumitra Sengupta talked yesterday about some of the current capabilities of SQL Data Services. Today we'll sort of pick up where Sumitra left off, and we'll talk about some of the future capabilities. Now I have to admit that this is one of my favorite types of talks to give at PDC, for two reasons really. First is because I get to stand up here and I get to be the talking head, basically, for all of the great work that's happening in the SQL Services team. All of the very bright engineers who work many hours a day to build some really cool stuff. I get to go walk around a few months before PDC, collect it all up, and bring it here and show you. So we'll go through some of that, and we'll talk about, and I'll actually show a lot of demos to talk through some of that stuff. So that's number one. So I got to take at least indirect credit for a lot of work that a bunch of smart people are doing. Another reason I like it is because it's futures. I can stand up here and I can talk a lot about the direction we're going, and I will, and give you an insight into some of the current incubations that we have, which are very cool. But then, of course, whenever I get pinned down about, well, when are you going to ship that? When is that going to be available? I can just go back to this slide and say it will be shipped in the future. But knowing that, and knowing I can't quite be excused completely, I will try to tease apart as we go through things that we believe are nearer in the future, sort of soon, and then things that really are more incubations, things that we will make available through a labs environment I'll talk about, which I'll encourage you several times to go to and interact with, looking for feedback. But we'll make it available to get feedback from you to really find out how much benefit it has for you, and how we might really want to finish it before fully productizing those capabilities. So I'll work through some of that as well as we go. Okay, and we won't go backwards, we'll go forward. Sorry about that. So the first thing to just kind of set the stage and to kind of pick up where Dave left off and where Sumitra left off, I really wanted to spend just a couple of minutes talking about what we see as some of the key services challenges, some of the challenges that customers have told us they face as they think about extending their current applications or building new applications that take advantage of these new capabilities of being services-based. And I think in particular, it's very interesting to kind of pull back, and Dave talked, I think, very well about this in his session, but just kind of pull back and think about this shift in context. Whenever you have these kind of paradigm shifts in computer science and in application development, it's always very much a two-edged sword. You have the new capabilities, the things that you can go do, the new applications that you can write, where, yeah, you had an assembler, you had a compiler, you could have, in an infinite amount of time kind of build that before, but now it's within reach. You can really build these for your applications in a cost-effective way. So that's the plus side of it. The challenge, though, is the fact that, well, there are new challenges. There are new things you have to consider as you build out these types of applications, and it would be just lovely if the software that you were using and if the platform that you were relying on helped you solve some of those challenges. And so just to drill a little bit more deeply, some of the challenges we think that are presented by a new world of services, software plus services, are listed here. And I won't go through every one of them, but a couple of them I think are pretty interesting to drill into. Trust, I think, is a particularly interesting one because it's one of the ones that just kind of hits you in the face as almost the first thing. You can think about an application even in client-server where the trust boundary around that application is pretty known and knowable. It's between the client and the server, and it's largely within the corporate LAN environment. You have AD, you have another identity repository and provider, you have an identity that's part of that, you can go talk to that identity provider and you can authenticate the user of the application. We've been doing that for a while. If you think about a services world, now that trust boundary expands beyond the corporate LAN. You are calling services, and your applications are calling services on behalf of users out across the public internet. It's the same problem, but it's much harder to solve now. How do I know that this person is who they say that they are? How do I know that that person, if I can establish their identity, is able to do the things that they want me to do for them on their behalf? And so that's why some of the things that you've seen in the Azure platform provide infrastructure for managing and dealing with that identity. And it has a particular flavor to it. It's a federated approach to that identity for exactly that reason. You can't have one massive, huge AD or other repository for everybody's identities. That won't work out quite so well. You need to be able to know who the authority is for that person and consult with that authority in that authentication. Interaction is an interesting one as well. We'll actually drill into that in some pretty deep detail. Whenever you're now having your processing happening across the public internet, the latencies are much different. The connection and the connection orientation of that application is much different. And we'll talk about data synchronization as a way of the capability that we're building into the platform to try to help you deal with that and help your applications deal with that. And I think the last one to mention real briefly is resource governance. Here, it's a particular challenge for us, and kind of the fun part, quite honestly, of dealing with software and services, is you now have a big, massive environment. You have data centers worth of computers, thousands and thousands of them, and they're all running basically the same software, all talking to each other. And you have, if you're lucky and you hope, you have millions of users using those capabilities. And they're doing it all together. But if you went and asked them, you said, well, would you like to have your ability to process your data and your records affected by somebody over here who you've never met, who happens to be a tenant in the same multi-tenanted environment? The answer, of course, would be no. So we have to bring out these capabilities, and we have to be able to provide the services and the capabilities that we do, but do it in a way where resources are shared and are appropriately governed. Because we've gone from a world where if you wrote a bad query and you ran that bad query and it took down your machine, it took down your machine. It didn't affect somebody else. In this new world, if you write a bad query and it takes down the machine, you've now made a lot of friends among the other tenants in that particular environment. And so that's a lot of what we do is to is to work on that resource governance capability. As Dave talked about and as Sumitra talked about, we see this as part of the overall SQL data platform. We see the relational database and the broad set of capabilities that we have delivered on server, delivered across mobile and desktop, and with the investments we're making in SQL Services and SQL Data Services, extending that data platform to the cloud. And so I just wanted to highlight that briefly. I think a lot of what I'll say today is framed within taking things in the left-hand side of that graphic, the mobile and desktop and the server, and as appropriate, extending those capabilities out into the cloud, providing them as services in a way that provides for resource governance. And in an environment, an integrated environment, that is both integrated between on-premises and off-premises, as well as integrated with other key building blocks around identity and around federation of capabilities and messaging and data sync and things like that. So that's a good way to think about what I'll talk about is just how we're looking at this to extend the data platform to the cloud. As part of that, as part of the talk today, there's a broad set of things that I could talk about. And again, it's part of the challenge in designing this talk was the fact that it was kind of an embarrassment of riches to some degree. I'll focus on three key areas of data model, of occasionally connected clients and software, and then business intelligence. So data model, how do you get at the data? How do you interact with the data from a programmability standpoint? Occasionally connected, how do you deal with the fact that sometimes your applications will be disconnected and you desperately like it, your productivity with that application not to plummet to zero when that happens. And then finally, once you have these capabilities and this data that lives in the cloud, what other things can you do? What appropriate analysis and business intelligence do you need to do on that data? And so we'll talk through each of those three bullets as we go. Okay, so that's the top level thing. Here's a slide that you may not have seen yet. Of course, this is the Azure Services Platform. This is, again, as a framing slide. We're talking today about SQL Services, but I want to make sure we don't lose sight of the fact that SQL Services capability lives within the overall Azure Services Platform and is integrated well with the other higher-level building blocks that sit atop the Windows Azure layer. When talking about that stack that we just saw, there's a couple of capabilities that are there that in the past I think we've not done a great job of talking about in a crisp fashion. So I want to take just a minute to talk about them. One is really how to think about the storage capabilities that you have as part of Windows Azure and the database service that we're providing as part of the SQL Services. And so very, very easily, very quickly, just the best way to think about this is to think about the on-premise analogy. In fact, one of the things that I've learned, which has been a great mnemonic, is if you ever get confused about how to think about services, and trust me, I get confused fairly often, if you try to think about an on-premise analogy, two things occur. One is there normally is one, and two, it normally helps sort out how to think about some of these things. And I think here in particular, it's helpful. So the Windows Azure storage, if you think of the on-premise analogy, is the file system that you have on-premise. It's the file system in the cloud. File systems have done very clever things and have been used for years and years and years, and will continue to be used in that particular way. They provide storage. They provide some structure. They provide some primitives for you to use. And if they do their thing right, they provide it at very, very massive scale. You can just keep writing to the file system, and it sort of stops when the disk fills up. The other side of the analogy is the database side, which is a very valuable set of capabilities on-premise. People have used it for years and years. And that's the right way to think of SQL Data Services, as the database in the cloud. As I said, we're extending the rich capabilities of SQL, but it's there to provide that higher level set of capabilities, the richer, more valuable data model, the relational processing capabilities across a broad set of data, just like we have on-premise with SQL Server. And it's really there to help us and to be a place where we can do the integration across on-premise and off-premise. And so that's the right way to think about that, is the database service in the cloud, as opposed to the file system in the cloud. And just like on-premise, you need both, and you write applications against both. It's great that we have both in the platform, in the Windows Azure platform for you to use as you build out your services. Okay. Just a quick drill down into SQL services. We'll talk a lot about the two chiclets there, database and data sync. Some of the other things that we'll look at, this is where we're going to kind of tease apart what's more closer term, what's a little bit longer away. The database and data sync are things that are a little bit more soon, and we'll drill into some of those details. Things like reporting against data in the cloud, data mining as a service, are things that are more incubations that we'll see today and that'll be available through that labs environment. And then finally, we have plans to invest in reference data and other key capabilities of the data platform like ETL. Part of the Windows Azure Services Platform, key thing else to take away from this slide is we really have built this on the solid foundation of SQL Server. And I think that that's important for a couple of reasons, but it both obviously is a fantastic technology platform, one that's been used for dozens of years now for all sorts of mission-critical database applications of all sizes. So taking that foundation, that technology foundation, and creating a service out of it is a great way to get a very scalable, very robust, and very battle-hardened service. So that's what we've done. The other thing that's important to underscore there is that if you think about the things in SQL Server that you have on-premise, a lot of those things we'll talk about will be exposing out of that technology foundation through the SQL data services. So now we'll talk about how some of the data model looks, but when we talk about the future, I'll talk about, well, of course we're built on the SQL Server foundation. The core relational capabilities at scale are there. We'll continue to do the work around resource governance to make those capabilities available as part of the service. And so that's the other important thing to take away here. Okay. All right. And I promise, other than these first few slides, we'll spend most of our time doing demos. This is my last slide. Drilling in just one slide further. Let me back up a second. This is the Trey Research Media Marketplace demo application that Dave demoed and that Sumitra demoed. And I thought it was interesting just to highlight some of the key capabilities that this application needs, some of the requirements of this application. Because I think it will set up some of the other functionality that we'll go through. We need to be able to have an integrated platform across on and off premises. As I mentioned, that platform needs to be able to deal with both structured and unstructured data. And it needs to do it in a seamless way across both on and off premises. We need to be able to have some of that services goodness, if you will. We need to be able to have parts of our application kind of scale friction-free. If our application takes off and we happen to get millions of photographers all over the world using our marketplace to buy and sell photos, that's great, but I don't want to have to go either pre-provision that or go buy a bunch of machines and have my demand and my ability to grow my business constrained until I do so. And then finally, because I have this thing spanning both on and off premise, I need to be able to do multi-master data synchronization. I need to be able to deal with occasionally connected clients. I need to do that in a reasonably straightforward fashion in terms of application development. And so I think this is a great application because it brings all of those things together, and we'll look at some of those capabilities as we go through. Okay, so that's it for the slides for just a second. The first thing I want to show is actually a little bit of a tangent, but it is great. My machine just went to sleep. But it was something that came up about a couple weeks ago, and it's a real quick story. Some guys from the Visual Studio team, the dynamic data part of Visual Studio, David Ebo and his PM, They kind of called us out of the blue and said, hey, are you the SQL Data Services guys? I said, yeah, that's us. So we got this great thing called dynamic data. You got to see it. We're like, yeah, we're kind of getting ready for PDC. Well, okay, send us a video. And he sent us a video, and it turns out it was one of the coolest things that I had seen in quite some time. Because what the dynamic data is an extension to our ASP.NET controls, but they're controls with templates that we use inspection to interrogate the object model of your application and will dynamically render at least a reasonable ASP.NET application. And so I have a quick demo of that here. So the backing story is for a blog. So I have blog objects, and they inherit from this Cloud DB entity. And I have post objects, which inherit from the same root entity. So if I run this thing, simply by creating those classes and doing a little bit of stitching code that will bind us into the Astoria framework, which I'll get to in a minute, voila, we have a dynamic data website, which I can interact with. I can create a blog. And insert. And what it's doing is it's creating that data and putting it in that object, but it's also using SQL Data Services as the database store behind the scenes. And it can do that because SQL Data Services has a flex entity data model. Every entity you give it is a property bag. And so in this case, it's a property bag of two things, name and description. And sure enough, the infrastructure code of dynamic data will use ADO.NET Data Services to push those objects back into the SQL Data Services, and SQL Data Services is quite happy to store it for us. We can further go and let's get out of this for a second. So we can interact with that and put in some comments, and life is pretty good. Let's go down here and let's add an attribute on the fly. So I'm gonna remember how to use the code templates. There we go. Okay. And what I've done is public, great. Let's get our formatting right. Oh, much better. So I've just created a string, called it content, put a simple get and set on it. And what I'll do is I'll adorn that adorn that member object with an attribute, call it a data type, which says, turns out, dynamic data, when you show this, please show it as a set of multi-line text. And when I do that and run, which I didn't do, now when I go back in, the data that's retrieved from SDS will have the two fields that I had before. But now it also has this additional, I beg your pardon, I have to go do a comment, which is where I put that, or a post. There we go. And so when I do a post, now I have an extra field, which is this content field here. And it's probably a little hard to see. So it's a content field, and it's a multi-line text box. And all I did was set an attribute, or create that part of the object, and then tell dynamic data how I wanted it to be rendered. So pretty cool. And again, any post that I had before, it'll return. I'll be able to fill in the comment. It'll store it back. Even when I've added a comment to a post that didn't have it before, SDS's flexible data model will be able to deal with that pretty nicely for me. Okay. So let's go do one more thing here, tie it all together. What I also want to do is do a couple of things. I have blogs and I have posts. I want to have comments on these. And so what I'll do is come down here. There we go. And I'll add a little bit of glue code here. And what this glue code is going to do is it's going to put in an iQueryable declaration for me. And, yeah, thanks very much. It's good. I'm in a public location here. And what I'm going to do in that is I'm going to specify that this class down here, which I've kind of pre-cooked, called comment, I want it to be known to iQueryable. And it turns out that it's this iQueryable object that'll stitch this object into the ADO.NET Data Services framework. And because SDS will speak the ADO.NET Data Services protocols, That's the only bit of code I have to do to get this object to be represented in SDS in a very, very flexible way. So I'll do that. I'll come down here and I'll add a rating on this, and I'll use some of the additional adornments I can in terms of the default value of 43 and the integer slider. I wanted to represent it as a slider rather than something I type in. And I want to limit the range from 1 to 100. And sure enough, now when it goes and it drives, renders the thing for me, I now have my comments. I can go into blogs. I can go drill into Patrick's blog. I can add a new post. I get a date picker. Eventually get a date picker. I'll put a title. Whoop. I'll insert it. One of the things that you may notice at the bottom of the screen there is that the application is going to crash. Okay, so now that I've demonstrated that, in fact, it is real code, let's do this. Let's do this. We're going to start all over again. Okay, well, moving back to our slides. What I was getting to, and it did it 3 times in prep. But what it gets to is the fact that I can marry that code-first approach to development with the flexible data model of SDS. And I can put those two things together, and I can do a couple things. One is obviously I can do some very rapid prototyping. With any rapid prototyping, sometimes there's a crash and burn step. But I would have figured that out. The other thing I can do, though, is to use both those things to build an application that will extrude other applications. I can build both the data model in terms of the object model, and I can have the UI generated on the fly. And I can do that in a very, very flexible way, given the flex entity model of SQL Data Services. And so let's talk about that, drill into the data model here real briefly. So this is a slide that Sumitra showed. Just to put it up real quickly. As I mentioned, the entities of SQL Data Services are property bag, name value pairs. Those entities are housed within a container, which you can think of as a database. It's a set of entity kinds, and there are one or more kinds of each entities. But it's the unit of consistency, it's the unit of query in the system, and it's also a unit of scale out that you can use in your applications. And then finally, those containers are collected into something called an authority, which is a unit of geolocation and billing, and it is a collection of containers. This is the lever you can pull as you think about how you want your data organized in SQL Data Services to get geolocation. If you want certain data either located in the EU or you want data located closer to where it's going to be used. So that's the basic data model for SQL Data Services, and we refer to it by the acronym ACE. And I'll make reference to that as we go through. This slide talks a little bit about some of the future investments that we're making in that data model. Talks about some of the current capabilities, which I've covered, but it compares and contrasts those with some of the future things that we're looking at to extend this data model. Among the key things to take away, of course, are the fact that we're looking at, in addition to the flex entities, support for schematized data. So just like you can provide a schema if you want, in the future you'll be able to provide a schema to SQL Data Services and have us enforce that schema on insert. Right now it's flex entity model. We're also looking at different ways, additional richness in organization of those containers, because that turns out to be a very important part of the logical data administration of the application. So that's on the data model side, some of the investments we're making. Just so on the operational model side, we have the system that will do automatic provisioning of things and provide support for relational queries. Future capabilities, as I mentioned, are more and more of those relational capabilities being surfaced through that SQL technology platform foundation. Things we have joins today within a container. We're looking at joins and other relational processing across containers. So more and more, we'll take some of the key richness in that platform. We'll work on, and do engineering around resource governance, and we'll make those capabilities available through the service. But hopefully this gives you at least some idea of where we're pushing these things forward in the future, both in terms of the data model as well as the operational model. Okay. A quick word about ADO.NET Data Services. So if you were paying close attention to Sumitra's talk, he talked about the interaction pattern with SQL Data Services as link-based in terms of its query syntax, which is accurate and true. One of the future investments that we're making, and one of the things that will be available in this labs environment, and we'll demo here in a second, is alignment of that SQL Data Services with ADO.NET Data Services. Now, ADO.NET Data Services is the standard .NET way to interact with data across internet-friendly protocols and standard message formats. Message formats like Atom Pub protocol is what it uses. ADO.NET Data Services also provides fantastic client-side support in terms of its tooling. What we're working on, both in terms of us as well as the team who is working on ADO.NET Data Services, is that technology was originally designed for schematized data, and we're extending that over time to support the broad range of both schematized and flex entity data. So we'll have that standard message format, those standard protocols across that spectrum that you see. Just so, what we have, as I mentioned, in SQL Data Services is a flex entity model, which we have in a first step in investment aligned to the ADO.NET's data services model. And we're going to extend that data model and that service head to include schematized data. So over time, you should think of these things as kind of coming into complete alignment. And we'll use the protocol and message capabilities and the client-side tooling to provide a very symmetrical environment across both data sources that live on premises, as well as data and data sources that are in the cloud. It's actually a great example of where you can get a lot of benefit of having an integrated data platform that spans both. So we'll take a look at some of this in just a second. So how this will work a little bit more under the covers is that in SSDS, we have metadata about the entities and in the future, the schemas that you have in your containers. We'll be able to generate the CSDL that the Astoria tools and the Astoria protocol require of us. And those client-side tools will generate the client-side classes that you need. And they'll take the attributes that get generated from that will really take on two flavors. You'll be able to say, for example, against your flex entities, that you want some set of the flexible properties to show up as predefined attributes or predefined members in those class objects. And so in this example, we have both submitted by and title, which are flex properties. We're going to have those as part of the class definition. We have the rest of the flex entity properties, which we've decided to have the Astoria tools and protocols continue to deal with just as a property bag. So what we'll do is we'll put those into this dictionary object you see at the bottom of the screen. And we'll be able to access those flex properties and deal with the fact that some entities will have a certain set of properties, some will have a potentially slightly different set, and deal with it in a very straightforward way within our development environment. And so this is how it will work. As these things come together, you'll be able to map the data model of SQL Data Services and leverage the client-side tooling of ADO.NET Data Services. Okay. To query the system, there are two ways to query within that C# syntax that we just saw. One is the link style query that you see at the top of the screen. We'll take a look at this actually in a program here in just a second. But you loop over all image context, you look for a particular value that's submitted by value, and you return the results. And you for each over those to get the query to run. We'll also support, again, this is where we're extending ADO.NET data services in the future, to allow you to do that same type of a query, but to include, as it shows there, some of those flex properties that live in that dictionary object that I showed you on the previous slide. So again, a very natural alignment of those two technologies. Okay, so let's switch back over. And we'll tell it that, yes, indeed, we are still at a public location. And we will get out of this, please. Okay, and we'll get out of this too. All right. So what I'll do is I'll bring up a couple of things. First thing I want to bring up is one of my favorite query editors, Internet Explorer. And what we'll do is we'll just take a look at some of the query syntax real briefly, and then also take a look at a client-side program. And so I mentioned that in addition to the flex entity capabilities, we have the ability to query in ADO.NET syntax, which wasn't in my cut buffer. Let me try that again. There we go. The machine's running pretty slow. Wow. Okay, I'm going to try one more time, and then I'm going to move on. It does. Thank you, Zach. Again. There we go. There we go. Thank you, Zach. Okay, so what we're doing is we're using a slightly different syntax from the one that you may have seen. So let me just do a couple of things. Let me scroll in here real quickly and take a look at the query syntax that we have here at the top. What we have is a query syntax that is familiar to you. We just use the authority that I've created for this demo, which is PDC 2008 Patrick MC data, Patrick MC. It's going against data.database.windows.net. I have this other new syntax that we've added to the query that will point it at a service head that's going to talk that ADO.NET data services. And then once I do that, I can, at the end of specifying my container, which is tray research, I can just specify the syntax of ADO.NET data services. And so here I've just asked it to give me all entities and return all entities as part of the query. And sure enough, it's done that. You may notice that this is a little bit of different XML than you may have seen before. It is an Atom pub feed, which in Internet Explorer will normally come up in a nice feed view. But here I wanted to drill into some of the capabilities just again to hammer home the point that it is returning Atom pub out of that service endpoint. And so with that same query, I can extend on the end of that URL. I can extend other syntax from the ADO.NET data services syntax and query, filter, and do other things as part of interacting with this part of the service. And so what I'll do is I'll jump forward here a little bit, go back into Visual Studio. And what I've done here is I've simply written a small client program, which will, again, use the Astoria client-side tools. I had to do a little bit of extra work here because of the flex entities versus schematized data. But once having done that, I can set the context around iQueryable, and then I can do the same kind of a query using the link-style query syntax that you would use against any other provider plugging into that framework. And so here I'm searching for where E is in, we're looking for employees. I'm particularly looking for where region name is part of the United States. And then at the end of this, I'm going to ask it to give me just the top 5 of that result set. So I can limit it to the top 5. And so with that, if I hit trusty F5, my console window comes up, and sure enough, I get the top 5 records back from that query, and I just put them out to the console. So again, I didn't do anything to the data. The data has been in that container for some time, but I'm able to access it through that ADO.NET Data Services endpoint and get it both in my program or interactively through Internet Explorer. So valuable in terms of providing that symmetry that we talked about between the two environments. Okay. So that's our entity data model. Let me hit that and get out of here. Put those away and switch back to my PowerPoint slides. So we talked about the Visual Studio environment, and we just saw a little bit of it. One of the key things about ADO.NET Data Services, as well as the Azure Services Platform all up, is broad reach and interoperability. This is another one of those challenges we talked about. When you have services and services capabilities, how do you access them through a broad set of client technologies? You get a very rich experience within Visual Studio. We think you get the best experience within Visual Studio, but you should also be able to program against those services, program against that data from a broad set of open source client libraries. And that's, of course, what you get by being able to rely on the standard message protocols protocols and message formats that we support. We get that broad protocol, that broad reach support. We are also investing in some client-side tooling, or client-side libraries, I should say, and making those available through the open source community. One of the ones that we're announcing today is a Ruby library that's available on the URL that you see there. And this is a pretty simple library that uses the active record part of Ruby to interact with SDS as part of a Ruby application. We feel very, very good about both this investment, but also the fact that this will spawn other client-side libraries for a broad set of other technologies over the next half year or year. So this will provide a lot of capabilities to you as you go to build the applications that you'll build against this. Okay. So that's the data model. We talked about both where it is today and some of the investments that we're making in the future. Then another thing to talk about is data synchronization. This is one of the things that provides you the capability to be able to write occasionally connected clients and run those clients and really have the functionality and the productivity of those clients be able to deal with the fact that you will be occasionally disconnected from the data source. And so there are 3 broad ways to think about sharing data through data synchronization. One is a pretty simple way of taking that data that you have on premise and sharing it through something like data sync and the data framework and mirroring that in the cloud. Any changes that you make in the cloud are shared on premises. On-premises changes are shared back up into the cloud. This gives you a great sort of base level capability to share that data across devices and across different enterprises, in particularly partners where you want to share a subset of your corporate data, and it's appropriate to share with partners through a data hub in this manner. You want to be able to write occasionally connected clients, again, so that when those clients can participate in that sharing. When they do so, their productivity doesn't drop to 0 when they are disconnected. That oftentimes means having a local cache of that data on that client, both in the form of Windows Compact or SQL Compact Edition on Windows Mobile, or SQL Express or some other database on the local on your laptop. And so there's another set of capabilities on top that allow you to do that we're investing in. And then finally, this notion of a sync service, which would be a higher level set of capabilities that would do some additional management of those sync relationships for you. And so as you kind of walk across this slide, you can think of this as building levels of technology that are available. There's the base sync framework and the providers of the sync framework that allow you to share data from on-premises to the cloud. There's integrating that sync framework with things like the ADO.NET data services to provide a way to have occasionally connected clients be able to have that capability without the client code having to do all of the heavy lifting that needs to be able to cache things locally, the need to be able to sync up when the connection is reestablished. That's part of the protocol. It's part of the way that the clients will interact with that service. And that's some of the investments we're making in the sync framework and ADO.NET data services is to allow that. And then thirdly, though, that notion of a higher level set of services, a sync service, that will allow you to sync all sorts of things, clients, mobile devices, even mobile devices that are not on the Windows platform and that are not and can't be full participants. The metadata for that and the management of that sync relationship will be the value delivered from that sync service that's layered on top of the foundational capabilities of SQL data services. And so these really are the investments that we're making as we're bringing things like Sync Framework and its rich provider ecosystem and bringing those into the cloud environment and making sure we're integrating well across cloud and on-premises. Okay. And so Sync and Sync Framework is very key aspect of that. So I want to also leave some time to talk about business intelligence. So we've talked about data modeling and the investments we're making there in the data modeling space. We've talked about investments in the Sync framework and what those will do for you for writing occasionally connected apps. As I mentioned, once you have data in the cloud, you quite naturally want to do analytical processing and reporting and business intelligence kind of capabilities on that data. And so some of the investments we're making are around taking the key capabilities of the SQL Server Analysis Server and making those available as a service. Now, this is one of those ones that is an incubation. It's a nascent kind of offering for us. It will be available on that labs that I talked about, but it is a service that is using the analysis server capabilities to do data mining. Today, for those of you who have used it and come across it, we have the ability to have Excel plugins that will interact with Analysis Server and to do the data mining in a way that's very approachable from an information worker perspective. What we're doing is we're adding a thin client capability to that, but also enabling that Analysis Server to run in the cloud. Right now, with the Excel plugins, that Analysis Server has to run somewhere on your premise, and it largely has to be properly configured to be accessible from these Excel plugins. We have an incubation around Analysis Service where that is a service that you can hit on a public web service. You can either upload data from Excel into that service and have it do some of that table analysis that the Excel plugins give you. Or you can also interact with that service, and as a layered service on top of SQL data services, you can tell it, give it your credentials, and tell it to pull data from a container that you have, that you've stored your data in up in SQL data services. And so again, it gives you that flexibility to use that always-on service, that scalable kind of ready service in terms of the analysis, and in this case, in terms of the data mining. It allows you to access it in a way that it fits what you need to do. If you have a bunch of data locally, you can use Excel and upload it and do that processing. If you stored it in SDS, you can access it that way. So let's take a quick look at that. And I will stay here. So what I'll do is I'll go back into my old friend Internet Explorer. And what I've done is I've gone to the URL that is the incubation analysis server and this is the one that will do the table analysis tools that will do various data mining capabilities for me. Excuse me. So again, those of you who may be in the back of the room a little bit, at the top, we have a set of things we can do. We can take our data set, we can analyze key influencers, do some forecasting, do some prediction calculation, do the set of things that you can do in Excel with those table and analysis tools. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and we'll ask it to load data. I've asked it to load data from SQL Data Services. I'm going to give it my username, of course, and password. There we are. Oops. I've also asked it to look at to go take data from the authority AdventureWorks. I'm not sure why that's a little bit too slow. So it's going to go to an authority that I've created called AdventureWorks. Remember, authority is that top-level capability within SQL Data Services that has all my containers. And I'm going to ask it to go to a container called vTarget Mail 2000. For those of you who are familiar, this is the data set from the AdventureWorks sample database that I have as part of SQL Server. I've just gone to that particular view, and I've uploaded that data into a container in SQL Data Services. I'm also at the bottom there going to do a query because I don't want all of that data. I just want to do my analysis on North America. And so what I'll do is I'll use that query syntax, which says get the entities from this data set. And where the flex property region is equal to North America, I want to select all of those. And so with that, I'll ask it to go, and now it's working on my behalf, going to SQL Data Services with my credentials, pulling the data set, and showing it to me in grid form. And now it has it. And I can go back up here and I can say, okay, great, this is the data set I want. I want to analyze the key influencers of this particular data set. So what I'll do is I will say I want to analyze the key influencers of what makes people in this data set more likely to purchase a bike. I'm a bike seller at the moment. Give me the things in the data set that statistically indicate a predisposition to purchase a bike. And we see both things that are contributing toward it in terms of yearly income of a certain range, marital status. We see things that are counter-indicative, also in terms of yearly income and some other things. So this has analyzed that data set on the fly for me. I can then further refine. I can go into this prediction calculator and I can say, okay, great. You have the data set. You know what the key influencers are. Create me a model that I can then use to predict when a new customer that I have, when they're likely to be a bike buyer. So just give me a form I can use with those customers to figure out if, based on some answers to some questions, they're likely to be a bike buyer. And that's what I have here. I have this. I have a prediction calculator for bike buyer. Down here near the bottom, I have both the ability to specify kind of for my, if I'm doing a marketing campaign, I want to be able to specify, well, the potential profit is $10 for a good sale. It cost me $5 to go tell, to send material to somebody if they don't buy a bike. So I can kind of tweak the model here a little bit and ask it to kind of refine it. But what it will do is it will then wind up with a model that is interactive that you see here in the blue box. And I can go in and I can specify things that will potentially be indicative of a bike buyer. And sure enough, the total score there you'll see is changing as we go. And this is a way it's using the model that it's built based on the data set to analyze a new entry. And then lastly, what this gives me is over here on the right-hand side, is it gives me some pretty gruesome HTML. But I can take that HTML and I can embed that model and I can embed the UI for that model in a web page. And now if I embed it in my website where I'm getting new customers and new references, I can solicit some information and I can tell based on the model that I've built through all of this about whether they are likely enough to buy a bike from me that I want to send them an offer, that I want to maybe send them some extra material or offer them an additional discount. So I've done all of this in a pretty straightforward way. I've done it without having to set up any kind of hardware or muck with any kind of a server. And it's a great way for me to be able to take a data set and to use this friction-free capability to go analyze that data set. Okay. So with that, let's jump back over to our PowerPoints. So that's Analysis Server. The other things in the ecosystem, if you will, of our business intelligence platform, in addition to Analysis Server, which you see on the right-hand side, we have Report Server, which we'll see here in just a minute, where we've created a data provider for Report Server that will allow you to report against data in the cloud. And just so, as a future investment, something that we're doing over time, it makes sense to have capabilities like SQL SSIS, SQL Server Integration Server, be able to interact with that data as well. And so one of the demos you can see, if you stop by the booth that we have down at the lounge, is a demo of an incubation of those SSIS components that will also talk that protocol to SDS and be able to read and write data as part of an on-premises data flow. So pretty cool stuff. And it allows you to take the data that will live in the cloud and the data that will live on-premise, and allows you to continue to do the rich BI processing, be it reporting or Analysis Server, against that data, independent of where it lives. So really bring those two worlds together. Okay. And so this is a drill down into Reporting Server and what it's doing as it's reporting against data in the cloud. What I'd like to do, if the machine hasn't quite gone to sleep on me yet, is actually jump over and build a quick report. So what I'm in is Report Builder. Just released recently, Report Builder 2.0. It's a great environment. It's meant to be a way for information workers to build reports using the SQL Reporting Server. And so, what I'll do here is I will start with a blank report. I will insert a table into this report. You'll notice that I've pre-cooked, if you will, a configuration for a data connection for SDS. I'll go into the query, and here I can again use that query syntax that we talked about. You'll notice again a couple of things. I'm going to pull two different entities, and I'm going to join across those entities, kind of looking for photographers that are in the local area. So because I want my report to be about photographers in my database, but I want it to be organized by city. So I'm going to go look for that information. Sure enough, if I run that against SDS, I get back all of the photographers in my database, so I know my query is good. I go ahead and say next. And here I'm just going to do a quick, real quick report build. I'm going to use city as the row group. I'm going to do first name and last name. I'm going to have an area above it for a reason you'll see in a minute. I'm going to stick with blue because blue seems to be the color of the week. And there I have my report. And so now if I run back to home here and I run it, this report is going to go get generated. As part of that report, it's going to call into SQL Data Services. It's going to return that data, and then I'm going to be able to see that data and interact with it in a very rich environment. This is a very approachable and a great environment for building out these kinds of reports. But since you've seen that if you were in Dave's talk and you saw a little, Sumitra hinted at it, we're going to up the ante here a little bit. We're going to say, well, that's great. I can report off of SQL Data Services. And again, in the talks you may have seen, you've seen reports where two different areas of the report are pulling data both from SQL Data Services as well as from on-premises SQL Server, which is, again, a great way to get reports that cross those two worlds. What we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and we're going to put in our environment, we're going to go ahead and create a sub-report as part of our report on photographers. So all I did was I merged two fields together and I dropped a sub-report in. I'm going to jump into the properties, and I'm going to pick a report that's sales trends by city. So on-premise, I have sales trend information. But in the cloud, I have information on the photographers that are interacting in my system and that I'm interacting with through my marketplace. And I want to bring those two things together. What I'll also do is I want to add a parameter here for the city, because every time a report builder will run, what it's going to do is it's going to render the group that I told it to around city, and it's going to query the local data set for the appropriate subset of data for that group. So it's going to run that sub-report multiple times. And sure enough with that, I'll run the report again. And this time I'll get both the original report we saw a minute ago, where we have the photographers grouped by city, but I can take advantage of the local report builder and the cool controls that it has, and I can use the Sparkline chart to show sales trends in that same region for those same photographers in the same report. So I can bring both those things together, and I can interleave them in a very, very natural way and create a very rich report as a result out of that. So again, this is an example of how we've taken Report Builder and Report Server, and through some investments in a data provider, and there are many, many data providers for those environments, allowed that reporting capability to happen on premises, but report against data across those two environments. Okay, pretty cool. Okay, so that's reporting. So we've talked about data model. We've talked about data access. We talked about business intelligence. I promised you a couple of times we'd talk about this labs environment. All of the things that you've seen are available for you to use and for you to interact with on SQL Services Labs. This is a labs environment. There's several of them for various types of groups of technology within Microsoft. There's Office Labs. There's Live Labs. This is labs around extensions and incubations to the on-premise data platform to the cloud. So these are data-centric and database-centric incubations. It's available now off of the Microsoft.com WAC Azure SQL Labs site. There are actually, believe it or not, 6 incubations. We saw just 2 or 3 of them here, but there are 6 of them. One in particular that we've gotten a lot of feedback, even this week, is something called Project Huron, where we can use SQL Data Services and an Access plugin to allow you to take a local access database and publish it as a data hub in SQL Data Services. Once you do that, other people with the appropriate credentials can access that same endpoint, and they can subscribe to that same data set, and it's cached, and they interact with it locally, again on Access on their local machine. So this brings together a couple of things. It brings together the extensibility of Access. It also leverages very heavily the data, the sync framework. But it's a hugely valuable thing for folks, because it says if you have a data source that's grown up over time that many people need to share, it's a very seamless way to not change the experience. I still want to feel like it's my database and I can interact with it. I can write reports. I can do things through Access. But I want to share it in a more scalable fashion. I want to share it in a way that's potentially a little bit more secure. And I want to do it in a way that all the changes that happen on either side of that relationship are all synced back through the data hub, and that I'll get as soon as the synchronization down to my client happens. And so I urge you to go check that out. It's a really cool thing to play with. I didn't have time to demo it today. But if you come by the booth, I'll run you through a demo of it. It's a great example of some of the cool things we can do. And it's also a great example of some of the cool incubations that are available through SQL Services Labs. Okay. So with that, real quick summary, and then we'll take some questions. As we've seen, we've talked about data model, data sync, business intelligence. These are just initial examples of how we're extending that data platform to the cloud and doing it in a way that is well integrated, that allows you to use the capabilities and the key aspects of both in a very, very powerful way. We think this will allow you to build a new type of application. It'll also allow you to extend existing applications to deliver new functionality to those applications. We're doing a lot of investment. We'll continue to invest to take the key capabilities of that SQL Server technology platform, surface them up through that service, a lot of what we've seen here. And we'll continue to focus on broad and cross-platform interoperability to make sure that once the capabilities are there, that they can be accessed from a broad set of client technologies. Sign up for SQL Data Services, part of the PDC. We've gotten a lot of invitation requests so far. Please continue to sign up for that. We're also expecting to announce a public CTP of SQL Data Services in mid-November, so in just a couple of weeks. And we'll contact you if you expressed an interest in SQL Data Services through the Azure sign-up. We'll contact you when we go and make that announcement. So please do that. Work with the labs, play with the bits, give us your feedback. We really want to know where this is useful to you and what else we can do to continue to increase the utility. Okay. Here's some related sessions. The one I'll mention is at the bottom. Tomorrow, Gopal, very smart architect on the team, is given a deep drill down session in terms of some of the underlying technology for SQL Data Services. If you have an interest in knowing a little bit more about the resource governance and the scale out things, I urge you to go listen to his talk. It'll be a great one. And with that, thank you very much for your time. Please fill out your evaluation forms, and we'll take some questions. Thanks very much. And if you have questions, just either one of the mics will be great.
Question? Is Michael?
Question? Yeah.
Yeah, quick question. So
you bet.
ADO.NET Data Services works with the entity framework model in traditional sense?
Yes.
So when you merge both worlds together, ADO.NET Data Services with SQL Data Services, does it mean that you still need an entity framework model there, or you can just bypass?
Yeah, the short answer is no. What you'll be able to do is there will be a particular data model that you'll get as part of the service itself. So let me take a step back. So the entity framework will allow you to provide a model that is different than the underlying structure of the data and do the mapping between those two things. So it gives you the rich capability to do a whole bunch of stuff, but at its very sort of default behavior is to just create a model out of the data schema that you have in the source. So you don't need that, but it certainly is a capability that you can use when you use the entity framework. We have a flex entity model now in SQL Data Services that will extrude in the way that I showed you, and you'll be able to do some mapping between object attributes and the property bag part. When there's schematized data, you'll have some of those other capabilities to do that mapping, or the option to just kind of use it in the way that you have it in SQL Data Services.
Okay. So the bottom line is you still need that abstraction or some kind of model to interact between the ADO.NET Data Services and...
You do, but it can be sort of a default model that's one-to-one to the data model of the data model of the data source.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks very much. Yeah.
I hope this is not a dumb question, but
no, absolutely no dumb question.
Do ADO.NET Data Services and SQL Data Services continue in parallel for perpetuity, or do they get merged together, or what's their relationship in the long term?
Yeah, the short answer is they continue on in parallel. They do two different things. ADO.NET Data Services is client-side tooling, very rich tooling experience in Visual Studio. It is also the standard conventions for accessing today relational data, in the future relational and flex entity data across internet protocols and message formats. So that when you are aligned to ADO.NET Data Services, you support Atom Pub, for example, or the Atom Pub++ that ADO.NET Data Services supports. So it's giving you that skin, if you will, on the service, and it will continue to do so, and it will continue to be where we define the standard way of interacting. The SQL Data Services will continue because it's the service underneath that skin, and it will continue to provide the processing capability, the data model that will get mapped and extruded out through that skin, it will still continue to provide it. It's the service that's providing it. So another way of thinking of it is that skin can be used across a bunch of different data sources. SQL Data Services, in this case, is just one of those data sources that's going to use that skin. So they'll both continue because they both have different roles to play.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, yeah, you bet. In the back.
Will you be providing a local offline implementation for development and testing like they're doing with some of the other services?
Yeah, it's a great question. The short answer is we don't have that today, but it's something that we've gotten feedback on and we're looking very, very directly at. So we'll continue to look at that. We hear the feedback that would be super valuable. Yeah.
I know you can't give a timeline about what's further out, but in terms of epics or ice ages or something, can you give some sort of idea that if we're re-architecting something now to come out in 2 or 3 years, is this something that we better not be hoping, that is this just going to be bleeding edge at that point, or do you really expect something out as far as schematic data, ETL?
Yeah, it will depend on which of the capabilities. So they'll kind of smear in a spectrum. I think the right way to think about it is the kind of core relational capabilities that I talked about. Some of them are available, today. Join is in the bits that we're making available through PDC, and it wasn't in the previous invitation beta bit. So that's kind of cutting edge, but Join is there today. Some of the initial Astoria investment, ADO.NET Data Services investments are also available in the bits today, more in an incubation, but we'll continue to take those forward in the near term. Some of the other capabilities, the report builder against data in the cloud, likely to be more near term. Things like SSIS, I think there's more engineering for us to go do to figure out how to go interact with those, particularly given the speeds and feeds of that. And so I would say that that kind of a thing is a little bit more further out. But we are looking at a service and a service set of capabilities that will be available inside the next year. We're not ready to announce when yet and that kind of stuff, but the same kind of timing that Ray gave for kind of the Azure Services Platform will track no later than that, certainly. So that's the right way to think about it. But we'll start at that core, we'll build that out, and we'll make that available, and then we'll add over time.
And do you expect there'll be, for example, if I have a schema and I'm writing an application that works against that schema, that there will be, let's say, a year, 2 years out, things that you just can't do? I mean, certain
Right. Yeah. No. That's a great question, because the other thing to keep in mind is we will come out with a core set of useful functionality that customers are already using, but will continue to use and tell us is useful. We are in a services world, and one of the nice things about that, in addition to having to patch 1,200 machines on a Windows patch, is the nice thing about that is you have a much shorter cycle you can be on. You can release a new service every quarter, right. And that new service can have incrementally more functionality and should, but that gives us, it's not like V1 is the last train for the next 24 months. Right. We'll be on that very iterative cycle, and we'll do additional capabilities as we go. So the schematized data, I think, is a little bit more medium term. We're still thinking through that. Honestly, the folks on the team are kind of thinking through how to go do that in a resource-governed way. But we'll have a lot of capabilities to go do that. It maybe is in the third rollout after V1 or something. It won't be that we go dark for a couple of years.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks for your question. Yeah.
Coming from the relational world, could you draw some parallels between the ACE model and the relational model, i.e. authorities, containers, entities versus instances, databases, tables? What parallels are there any parallels?
Yeah, there are parallels, and the parallels largely hold. As I mentioned, the entities are rows, are records. They have a sort of a sparse column flavor to them, if you will. And we do, the other thing that the service does is it separates some of the physical data administration from the logical ones. But entities are rows. Containers are roughly databases. They're collections of different rows of different shapes. And containers is a collection of different entities of different kinds. Authority is you can think of it as an instance. It's the one, honestly, that we go around within the team about. There's key things that you need out of an authority, geolocation, billing, those sorts of things, and permissioning that don't always hold true for a SQL instance. You don't bill for a SQL instance typically. So that one is a little bit more of a pure services thing. But container as a logical database, certainly, and entities as groups of entities as tables, entities as rows, very strong analogy, and quite honestly, the way we talk about it internally to the team.
A follow-up question on that. In that case, an authority, could I have several authorities within one Azure project, or would I see
Yes.
it? Okay.
No, you can have several authorities. In fact, that's how you would geolocate across those. Okay, just two more questions, and then I have to wrap up here.
Just want to make sure I've got my head around this, right? Particularly with the ADO.NET data services.
Mm-hmm.
So is it possible to build, an application that can run both on premises and in the cloud using ADO.NET data services, so it can run using the SQL data services in the cloud and run against a local SQL Express or SQL Server store locally?
The short answer is yes. There are still some differences between the two. And part of the differences are because we're doing the initial work around alignment at the moment. And since we don't, since SQL Data Services doesn't have full schematized support, some things that ADO.NET has,
right. But if you targeted SDS as the subset that you worked within, you can run it both locally as well as in the cloud.
With some modifications. The other thing to keep in mind is there will be part of that data model, the authorities and containers that you have for SDS, which you won't have on premises. You'll have to do some modification. Okay. But yeah, that's a great way to think about it, because that's how you'll get some of that symmetry that'll allow you to access data across those two things.
Yeah, just trying to get the idea of whether we have to build, how much difference there is between the two environments that we operate.
And we'll align them more and more over time, but that's the right way to think about it. Okay, last question, real quick.
Yes, I'm still working under the SQL Server relational model too, so, and I haven't seen all these sessions, but there's just a few things that I'm trying to correlate from that model. The first one is like an enterprise manager, something that would allow you to just specify an authority and navigate through and interrogate containers and entities. Everybody I've seen is interacting through code snippets. Is there such a thing?
We have some investment in tooling. We're going to need to go do some more.
But I mean, your report generator was a kind of a, it almost looked like a sort of interface like that, but I didn't see you interrogate through. But so something like that is coming, you're saying?
We do have some in the SDK. There's something called the SDS Explorer. We'll also invest in letting the management tools that you have for SQL Server have visibility into the off-premises. It's another way we'll bridge those two worlds.
So let me give you a couple more things.
Okay. I'm sorry. I'm happy to stay and take other questions if there are. I do want to be sensitive to the next session coming in.
All right.
Would it be okay if we just chatted in the back for a little bit?
Okay.
Okay, great. Thanks very much.